It's April, and our theme for this month is resistance. So why are we starting with listening? Shouldn't we be talking about political resistance, fists in the air? There is so much to resist these days, so very, very much. But there is so much more to the topic of resistance than the political fists in the air kind. In fact, there is a lot of resistance we have to address inside ourselves in order to get to the point of effective political resistance. And actually, for some of us, it's tempting to skip over the types of resistance inside ourselves that demand our attention. Because some of us are more comfortable demanding justice with our fists in the air than we are facing and transforming our own resistance to change, to loss, and to uncertainty. And in case you're wondering, I'm talking to myself here, too. We all have resistance. Buddhism teaches that much suffering comes from our resistance to the way things are. Our refusal to accept uncertainty, change, interdependence, and all the ways we act out our resistance that cause suffering for ourselves and for others. And here's where listening comes in. Listening as a spiritual practice, as a transformative practice. Let me tell you a story. It's one of my very favorites, and it's from the Zen Buddhist tradition. One day, a Zen master named Nanin had a visit from an international scholar of Eastern religions who came to inquire about Zen. Instead of listening to the master, however, the learned visitor kept talking on and on about his own ideas and all that he knew. After a while of talking, Nanin served tea. He poured the tea into the visitor's cup until it was full, and then he kept on pouring. The tea poured over the sides of the cup, filled the saucer, and then spilled over onto the man's pants and the floor. Finally, the visitor could not restrain himself. "Don't you see that it's full?" he said. "You can't get any more in." "Just so," replied Nanin, stopping at last. "And like this cup, you too are filled with your own ideas. How can you expect me to give you Zen when there's no room in your cup?" I love this story because I want to show up with room in my cup. Like the visiting scholar in the story, and also like Kristen, I want to listen and learn. But how often do I show up to the countless opportunities that arise each day with a cup that is already full? Full of opinions and assumptions, beliefs and plans, full of feelings I haven't acknowledged or processed that get in the way of my listening. Learning to show up with room in my cup is a work in progress, and it always will be. It's the work of spiritual growth, and it's work we can do in religious community. Writer and philosopher Mark Nepo writes that deep listening requires letting go of our internal argument with the world. Before we can truly listen, we must exhaust ourselves of our assumptions. To truly listen, we must acknowledge and soften our resistance to things outside of our own minds. We have to set aside our own ideas to let something else in. I sometimes wish we all had someone who would secretly, invisibly, and without burning us, overflow our cups of tea whenever we forget that our deepest yearning is not to be right, to prove our knowledge or shore up our egos, but to put that burden down for a change. To soften our conditioned defensive so we can show up for ourselves and one another, ready to receive more wisdom, more truth, more connection, and more love. The first duty of love is to listen, wrote the Christian theologian Paul Tillich. Love is a relational quality, a relational power, and it requires a relational practice like listening to manifest. What does it mean then to listen? Not just to hear, but to listen. Hearing, writes Mark Nepo, happens physically when a signal is generated in the ear that gathers discrete pieces of information from all the senses and sends the aggregate to the brain, which creates a brief and comprehensive sound from it all. What we hear is the sum of life's vibrations, which constantly arrive like waves that soak into a perceptual shore of the mind-heart. Mark Nepo penned those lines while in the process of losing his hearing. One does not need the faculty of hearing to practice deep listening. There are so many ways to perceive and engage life's vibrations, but we do need to be open and attentive to them, to listen. Ultimately, I think listening means to foster a receptive orientation to the countless, ever-changing vibrations of life. Listening requires a willingness to let down the walls of our egos enough to engage with messages from beyond our own selves. I think listening, in the deep sense, in the spiritual sense, means to become intimate with life itself, with truth, with mystery, with other people and beings, and to allow that intimacy to shape us, to change us. We live at a time and in a part of the world where noise, distraction, busyness, and information threaten to overwhelm us. Not just threaten, actually do overwhelm us regularly. Maybe not all of us, but most of us. Who has time to listen nowadays in the way we are talking about? There is too much to do, too many crises, too many emails and texts and social media posts to keep up with, too many jobs and tasks and passwords to juggle, not enough money or hours in the day, and definitely not enough volunteers. But still, the relentless pressure to keep up the pace, to do more, to be more. And so we break down and burn out. We're mortal creatures after all, finite beings, limited in energy, intelligence, and power. In this frenetic context, we need spaces like this one to help us slow down, to come back to our senses, to reconnect to ourselves, each other, and the great mysterious source of our being, to remind ourselves that we aren't alone, to practice deep listening. So my friends, here we are, gathered together in person and on Zoom with our individual thoughts and feelings, our varied experiences, because we know we need one another. This past year has been a tough one for this community, although beauty and growth are very much happening here too. Just a few weeks ago, we welcomed 12 new members, and we have heat, so there are wonderful things happening. And 1 year ago, around Easter, the settled minister's tenure here ended abruptly amidst conflict. There have been many other staff transitions in the past year as well. There has been pain, there has been joy, there have been losses and gains. There is still some hurt and confusion and mistrust. There is much learning to be done. It's important to name these things because they are here. Listening deeply, you can sense them, even if you've never heard them voiced. Healing requires naming all these complicated truths and listening to them, listening to each other with room in your cups. The spiritual growth that can come in religious community is not all about the blossom. It's about the growth that occurs underground as well, the hidden, hard resistance, the struggle in the dark to break through the tough ground together into spaciousness and light. You won't get there if you're holding fiercely to your own truth. You won't get there if you resist breaking open and beholding what is present, the pain and the love, the broken branches and the new buds. It's all here, all of it. So I encourage you, loves, to listen. You don't have to do it all at once. Start small. Listen to yourself and tend to your own feelings so you can show up. Cultivate curiosity and reverence and a desire to learn and grow from your relationships. Listen to the stories you'll hear in just a minute from our guests from the Sequoia Dream Club. Let their stories change you. Go to the sharing circle after the service with Reverend Stephanie. Lean into wonder, listen, stay connected to your hearts. Offer yourselves and each other the gift of leaving room in your cups for the steaming, fragrant, nourishing tea that awaits. May it be so. And amen.